This is agribusiness, post-harvest losses, and entrepreneurial opportunity. What I want to do is to convert this big issue of post-harvest losses into something that we can really generate ideas from. We've been working on 3 separate talks. First one was this morning, value versus values, and now agribusiness, and then we move on to the role of the entrepreneur itself. So without further ado, we start with a problem, and the problem is post-harvest losses. Not by launching straight into something, I wanted a little bit of context. So I think it's very, very important that we recognize the world that is now confronting us with a lot of issues. We've got a volatile world, an uncertain world, a complex world, and an ambiguous one. And that volatility is best summed up in this slide, where what we're really seeing is we've experienced in the last year or so, we've experienced a COVID concussion, for want of a better word, where many markets went to zero. In my own country of the UK, the entire market of hospitality, that's all the bars, restaurants, and the rest of it, literally went to zero. There was nothing happening at all. And so that calamity meant that an enormous swathe of the economy, for its very first occasion since the Second World War, had no business whatsoever. And then, more or less at the same time, we had floods in Germany. That's the image from the top right. We had fires in Australia, which destroyed whole swathes around Sydney, the capital city. And of course, in Pakistan, we had a terrific problem of the monsoon, which wrecked whole swathes of things. I want to put a perspective upon these kind of calamities. I was working with Ericsson, which was a mobile phone operator some years ago. Probably nobody in the room even remembers that Ericsson were a mobile phone operator. They used to have something like 17% of the market. And then one particular season when I actually was working there, there was a monsoon in Pakistan which knocked out all of their tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. And so very rapidly, they could not produce their mobile phones. And because they couldn't produce their mobile phones, they eventually had to declare that that was it. They stopped. So what we must remember is that many of these global phenomena, these events, these black swans, involve the whole world. They don't limit themselves. We're talking supply chains because any harvest is linked to a supply chain in some shape or form. It might be the fertilizers that actually are used to clear the ground and make it more fertile. It might be the various people coming in to pick up harvest as we get going. But so don't ever think again that our supply chains are limited to one country. Supply chains are not limited to one particular location, because these days, you know, the typical pair of jeans is made in 17 different countries. So this interrelatedness means that a harvest is linked to all sorts of things. Let me give you an illustration of this. This is an illustration of just what an impact a harvest is having. This is the harvest for wheat in Ukraine. Now, the first thing is that 40% of global fertilizer is produced in Russia. And of course, that means that the fertilizers to the left are now not being exported. We're not going to feel that in Ghana until over the next 18 months and the next couple of harvests, but we will. Then we've got the wheat harvest in Ukraine itself. That's 30%. If we add the Russian harvest, this is moving into the 50%ers. Now, just imagine all of the things, all of the industries that will be affected by that. And then all forms of sunflower oil, 60% of the global sunflower oil market is supplied by Ukraine. Wheat also has a knock-on effect in the middle row with cardboard. And if you are online selling, then you usually deliver in cardboard boxes. So you can't just isolate these things. They're all beginning to be so massively entwined. And then the other thing is that all of this added together means that we have just knocked out 12% of global calories. Literally, 12% of global calories are not available to us because of this war in Ukraine. Now, where do you find 12% calories just like that? The answer is you don't. So this is what leads to inflation. This is what really exposes the fact that your supply is simply not meeting your demand. Now, this is a really crucial point, because when we come to post-harvest losses, the problem in Ghana is that we have post-harvest losses of an average of 40% across all vegetables and fruits. But the key point to explore is that the post-harvest losses in a product like tomatoes are anything between 29 and 67%. In okra, 25 to 40%. In ginger, 19 to 25%. And in onion, 8 to 40%. Now, it doesn't end there, because in onions, the demand outstrips Ghanaian supply by a huge percentage. In fact, it's about 60% is coming in from Niger, because we just simply don't produce enough of it. Now, this is critical, because those 8 or 40%, and this highlights a problem that we've got with numbers, because you can pretty much get all sorts of numbers by just doing a bit of homework. That's not good enough. We need to really improve our statistical analysis, because otherwise we just don't even know the scale of the problem. Now, there's lots of illustrations of this. For example, the census in Nigeria is a disaster, because what happens is they use the census to allocate the oil revenues to the different regions. And so nobody declares the exact result, because of course you get a higher percentage of oil revenue if you have a higher population. So there's an incentive to change the number. We've got to be very clear. We need better numbers in order to understand exactly what our opportunities are. And so these ranges, some of them are regional, so that's reasonable, and some of them are seasonal, and that's understandable. But when these numbers bounce around all the time, that's just not useful. And the key point here is this devastating lack of supply in Ghana in just those two simple ones. Onions. Even I grow onions in my back garden, and I can tell you, I don't find them difficult. There are other plants that we grow in our garden that are complicated, and you've got to be very careful with them. Onions are easy to move around, they're pretty robust, and you can grow them virtually anywhere. And still, we shortfall the demand for onions in this country by as much as 60%. And tomatoes is a very much more complicated story, because the shortfall in supply is being supplied. Now, you've got to break it down. It's being broken down by, we have canned tomatoes, which are virtually in their entirety supplied, it would appear, from Italy, but in actual fact, it's Chinese tomatoes landing in Naples, mixing with Italian tomatoes, canned in Naples, and sent into Africa. So tomatoes are produced harvested in China in the western provinces, which is a real problem, because this is the very area where the Uyghurs, that is the minority, are living and being, in effect, used as slave labor. This is a reality that's been exposed. If you go on YouTube, you'll see a Canadian expose, a German expose, a French expose, and so on. This is really serious. It's even more serious because I'm aware of Ghanaian tomato farmers who cannot make a living and have already left the country to get into Europe to make money for their families. We must understand that this has to stop. It's an international scandal and it needs to be exposed. However, that's not the problem that we've been highlighting with Project Kenton, because frankly, everybody else is already doing that. The big problem here is that Niger is the country that is supplying the shortfall in demand for fresh tomatoes into Ghana. So I just put it to you, is it really the case that the two simplest plants to cultivate and harvest in the horticultural world, the tomato and the onion, are the ones where we are now importing, using world trade figures in 2019, the figure of 2.5 billion US dollars. This is really ridiculous. So we move on, and what are we doing? We are monitoring the field to the fork story of post-harvest losses. So we're looking at soil and seeds, there's a lot. We're looking at harvest itself. One of the things is using standard measures. You know, a basket, a panier, whatever it is, we need to standardize that so that we get a simpler way of monitoring. Storage, this is critical. Our storage facilities are simply not up to scratch. And this is where we need to be pouring investment in if we can get it, because that will improve the situation. And often harvest, the damage is done straight after the harvest. You pull it out the ground, you take it off the plant, and then you've got an issue. You've got a particular issue with tomatoes in this country because the seeds that have been used have been inadequate. They've all come from the informal market, and they give rise to what the queens in the markets of Accra tell me are simply watery tomatoes. So it's known, it's well known, and in fact the government has sponsored 3 hybrid versions of tomatoes that simply need to be pushed into the market. 2019, the imports on vegetables is this figure of US 2.5 billion into Ghana. That same report suggests that since 2019, we've moved into a position where that figure is probably now worth 5 billion. 5 billion. 5 billion. This is big money. Now the demographics, this is very important, because if it's 2.5, 5 billion now, what is going to happen when you move from 32 million in 2022 to 37 million, 5 million more people to feed by 2037, and by 2063 the potential to have 61 million Ghanaians. Now here's the other point. A lot of them will be actually living urban-wise. So what is the problem now in delivering into places like Accra? Well, I've been looking at this, and it is certainly an issue. You pile on a huge increase in the urban population, and whatever we've got for post-harvest losses translates into an even bigger problem because of demography. And then we've got the global climate, COVID, and conflict position, which is giving us inflation. So this slide is summing up. We can't just leave it at post-harvest losses. We have to connect post-harvest losses with all of the other factors that are involved. It isn't enough to just say, I know that we need to improve the seeds. I know to improve other things. We all know that, but this is very key. Because we are living, as I put this morning, in a highly volatile situation. It appears to be a very complicated slide to read. Let me just read it for you. Left to right are the years, and this is a league table of various commodities that have jumped in price or dropped in price every year. The point you really need to follow is the green line and boxes, the highlighted green line and boxes, which as you can see goes down, up, crashes, up, down, up, crashes. That's wheat, and that was before the war with Ukraine. So this has actually been probably one of the biggest problems in the developing world for quite some time, that the commodities upon which much of your earnings is generated are bouncing on world markets like footballs. And when you do that, you don't have budgets. Is that the Chinese, and I've visited China quite a bit, the western provinces, the coastal cities are amongst the most modernized cities I've ever seen on the planet.